Hello and welcome to my polynomial equations video. I promise you that this video will not be as long as the other one. Well, let's try in the meantime. Alright, in the meantime, polynomial equations look like things that you're very familiar with. It basically is a polynomial. You guys agree that's a polynomial because it has more than one term. Equal sign. And on the right side of the equal sign is always going to be 0. That's if in fact it's not 0 on the right side, you're going to have to make it 0 or set it to equal to 0 one way or the other. So that's what a polynomial equation looks like. Solving a polynomial equation is pretty much the same exact thing. In this case, it'll be x is equal to -5, wouldn't it? So let's keep that in mind. Let's talk about principles of zero product. Now with principle of zero product, all that says is that if you have a times b equals 0, so I'll put it, if a times b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. Just to, for example, say for example I have a number 2 and I'm multiplying it by some number b to get 0. Then what does b have to be? In this case right here, b has to be 0, doesn't it? And on the converse, if I have some number, well, that's not what I wanted to do. Instead, what if I had a and I wanted to multiply it by, say, I don't know, 2 to get that to equal 0? Then what does a have to be? In this case, a has to be 0. But the way that we're talking about it is that if you have two unknown numbers, a and b, such that a times b equals 0, then one of those have to be 0. We don't know which one is 0. We don't really care. We're just exploring all the possibilities. So, for example, if we talk about two different polynomials, binomials in particular, say x plus 5 times x minus 2, and let that equal 0. So if that equals 0, based on the principle of zero product, that tells me that x plus 5 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. One or the other. One of those have to equal 0 to make this whole thing 0. So you just solve both equations. So if you solve both equations, you agree that this is going to be x is equal to -5 and this is going to be x is equal to 2, right? So those are the possibilities to make this 2. So what that means is that if you plugged for x -5 into this equation, this whole thing right here is going to be 0. If you plug 2 into this equation, this whole thing is going to be 0. So that's so basically what those are what we call the solutions of this polynomial equation. So what you should do, I should get out of this. What you should do is your solution set, what your solution set will always look like, just like when we did systems, is -5 and 2. So that will be your solution set to in this case right here. All right, so we got that. So let's actually go through some examples where we actually have to factor. So say we have this equation here, x squared minus 5x plus 6 and equals 0. So the way to solve this is first on the left side, the only thing you can do is factor. Don't subtract by 6 on both sides or anything like that. From here you can factor. So since you're factoring and you go through it, let's say we got 1 times 6 and we got 2 times 3 on this side. If I take care of this, this is going to be x, that's going to be x. Let's use the 2 and the 3 because that can add up some way somehow and give me 5. Now notice this sign right here is plus, so the signs are the same. This sign right here is minus, so they're both negative. So then we get that, right? And that's going to be equal to 0. So what happens after that? You set both of them equal to 0, x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. You don't need these parentheses now anymore, since it's by itself. And then from here you get that x equals 3 and x equals 2. So then your solution set would just be 3, 2. Easy enough, right? Now, it is going to come to a point in time where your polynomial equation is not going to be, you're going to have to do a little bit more work. So say, for example, this one right here, x squared equals x plus 30. If it's not already equal to 0, then you set it equal to 0. The way you do that is just form a trinomial or a polynomial or whatever, and basically get everything over to one side. So from here, I will subtract x on both sides, and I'll subtract 30 on both sides. If I do that, then that has to happen over here. You subtract x, you subtract 30, and then over here you're going to have x squared minus x minus 30 over here, and over here you have nothing left, so you get 0, right? And now factor. If in fact I'm factoring, this right here factors to be, you have your x, I'm going to use 5 and 6. So if I use 5 and 6, let's put my 5 here, 6 here. Signs are different. The larger one is negative, so negative plus, and that's going to equal 0. So what that means is that x plus 5 equals 0, and x minus 6 equals 0. So that means x equals negative 5, and x equals 6. So we got our solution set. Fair enough? So that's mainly how you do those. Now, the other part that I want to touch on before we go is what we call zeros of a function. So if in fact we can deal with, functions, the good old f of x. And the idea would be find what we call zeros. So if we're trying to find what we call zeros of a function, I'll put it here, of a function. If in fact you're trying to find those, then you're looking for all values of x. You're looking for all the x's such that f of x equals 0. So what values of x does this, which values of x does this right here happen? So let me put some dialogue in there. So you say x is a 0, and if right here. So basically x is a 0 if f of x equals 0. It could get confusing, but it's really not. So let's go through some of them. All right, first one. We'll say f of x equals x squared minus 9. Let's talk about this function right here. And your directions might say something like, find the zeros of this function. So if you had to find the zeros, it's pretty much the same idea. Really what you're doing is x minus 9 equals 0. You set that equal to 0, then you factor this side. You do difference of perfect squares right here. So isn't this going to be x plus 3, x minus 3 equals 0? So that means that x plus 3 equals 0, x, or x minus 3 equals 0. And that gives you that x equals negative 3 or x equals 3. So now we got our solution set. Easy enough. Another word for zeros, instead of zeros, another thing that we call these things is you might hear either word. You might hear them say zeros, or you might hear them called, you will hear them called roots. So when you hear the word zeros or you hear roots, they're talking about the same thing. The same thing as finding zeros of a function is the same thing as finding roots of a function. So that's pretty much all of it. I believe I go to the next page and it is blank. So that's all. Yeah, that was quicker than the last video. So I'll see you in class.